This is Ann Deliano. I'm in Austin, Texas with Luis Figueroa.
That's right.
And Luis with MALDEF.
That's right.
What is MALDEF?
It's the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, and we're a civil rights organization that works to protect and promote the rights of Latinos.
So you worked all during Texas legislative session.
That's right. We were working on immigration reform, school finance issues, higher education issues, and some voting rights issues.
So, Luis, what was the best thing that happened this session?
Well, without a doubt, the highlight's got to be killing voter ID. We've been working on that 3 sessions for now, and the Democrats really stepped up, and it was defeated once again. So that was a big highlight.
Can you tell the viewers, what does that mean for Texans, everyday Texans? Why is that important?
Well, it's really important because the issue is addressing a problem that really doesn't occur, and that's the issue of voter impersonation. And it's an issue that requires people to bring 2 IDs instead of 1 in order to go vote. And it's just an unnecessary burden for people to go vote that really doesn't solve any problems. And I think if we addressed it comprehensively and address all of our election problems at once, that would be something. But to address something that's going to disenfranchise people or something that's not going to solve anything is really disheartening that it became such a priority this session for certain senators.
So I was watching some of that. It sounded like on one hand, one side could show that that's going to mean a lot of people can't vote because of different things, different elderly people and different segments of society. On the other hand, the other side was saying there's so much voter fraud. Did they ever show any case of voter fraud in Texas?
There's very, very isolated incidences. They talked about Progreso, Texas, but
okay.
there was not any type of voter impersonation that voter ID would address.
Right.
They talked about, mail-in fraud and all these other types of fraud, but nothing that voter ID actually addresses, which is the thing, the part that bothers us the most. That there's the fraud that's happening isn't being addressed by this bill.
That's a very good point.
And when we did litigation this in Arizona, we found that voter ID affected 3,000 people over 3 elections. So it does have a real impact on real people.
Right.
For something that doesn't solve anything.
Well, thanks for doing that.
Absolutely.
And what else good happened this session? You were telling me some things.
Yeah, well, thankfully we did not have any anti-immigrant legislation this session.
That was good for Texas.
And then for Texas, that's really a strong step. And we had some, minor positive things too. We had a bill that would allow for people who are non-citizens who went to the military to be able to get tuition exemption. That for when they were non-citizens, they would be able to access the tuition exemption, and there's a few other minor things for kids who are doing naturalization ceremonies or appointments. They're going to get excused absence from school.
Good.
So we had some minor things, but the highlight was definitely killing voter ID, killing the anti-immigrant stuff, and saving the access to higher education under the top 10% plan.
Good. And then what would you say the worst thing was this session? What was the biggest disappointment?
The biggest disappointment was that we had some legislation that would have really derailed some serious issues. Obviously, children's health insurance plan was defeated at the end there. And then particularly the issues that MALDEF was working on were issues related to positive immigration reform that would have, for instance, dealt with some anti-immigrant ordinances that died at the last second. And the biggest one for us was bilingual education. We had a very strong reform. There's a court order saying we have to address the needs of the limited English proficient children, and the legislature failed to address that. And it passed both chambers, but it wasn't the same bill, and so unfortunately the bill died.
So both House and Senate really wanted something,
that's right,
but it procedurally didn't get done.
Exactly.
Would you say that was a leadership problem?
I would, and that was really the frustrating part.
Now, explain that. I read a little. There's a court order in federal court telling Texas they have to improve it.
That's
so now that the legislature hasn't helped bilingual children in our schools, what will happen now with that issue in the next year or so?
That's right. So right now we're arguing in the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals. If the 5th Circuit agrees with the lower court, they're going to put a court order on the schools, and they could enjoin the funds. They could put another type of order on there that will force TEA to do something, the Texas Department of Education Agency. And so if this issue isn't addressed, it forces it to the litigation, the courts to get more involved. And really it should be dealt with by the legislature.
So basically, because they didn't fix it, now a judge gets to write what they want to see on it.
That's right.
And they're giving it to a court.
That's right.
And I think that's an interesting point about leadership failing.
Exactly.
Because we want our elected officials to decide these issues for us and to have input as citizens and through groups like yours.
Exactly. And then really it's just them passing the buck to the courts instead of hitting it head on. And the Texas Education Agency was okay with the bill. It had full unanimous support in the Senate. It passed the House as an amendment, and to the fact that it didn't get done is really disappointing.
Right. I keep hearing failed leadership. What would you change before next session? If you could change anything in our state before you come back 2 years from now for next legislative session, what would you change?
I think they just got really focused on the priorities. The fact that voter ID was the #1 priority, I think really says a lot about the leadership. That a partisan issue that doesn't really address any problems became such a focal point instead of bilingual education, instead of funding more Tier 1 universities, instead of addressing health insurance, which is something that affects every person in Texas.
Right.
It really says a lot about where we are.
Have you heard a statistic that 1 in 4 children in Texas live in poverty?
I've heard that.
So we have a very significant amount of children in poverty and without health insurance, and they want to talk about some problem that didn't exist.
That's right.
Well, so a true leader would be dealing with real people, right?
Real people, education issues, health insurance, the stuff that affects everyday people. Not a partisan issue that only affects the politicians.
Louis, I want to thank you for all the work you did this session, because I know you worked very hard. So thank you on behalf of Texas.